Welcome back to A Story to Tell from the campus of Dixie State University. Today we're talking with Tim Martin. How are you doing?
I'm doing great.
You go by Tim or
I
President
go by Tim.
or Hey You?
I
or
go
what?
by Tim.
Tim.
Just Tim.
Tim, where are you from?
Well, I was born in California,
Whereabouts?
in Fresno, but never lived there, and spent my elementary school in Arizona, and then my wife and I were high school sweethearts in Las Vegas. And then I was grown up by then.
I've never grown up.
Yeah, well, there you go.
Well, I'm sorry you've grown up.
Well, when I graduated from high school, I went to the Naval Academy, and they said, okay, you are now going to go fight a war. And so I thought, well, that's probably time to be somewhat grown up, and that's probably my peak at that point. So.
You were born in Fresno, but you never lived there.
Well, because that was during World War II. My parents moved away as soon as I was born. Shortly after I was born, the war ended. And my dad was in the Air Force. He was a pilot, flew P-38s in World War II. And then he got transferred in the Air Force and ended up at Nellis in Las Vegas. And so that's where we settled. That's when people say, where are you from? That's what I say, that's where I'm from.
Well, in Arizona, how did that fit in?
Well, he was at Luke Air Force Base when I was going to grade school. And so we lived in Glendale, Arizona. It was great. You know, I have wonderful memories of living, well, everywhere. Had a great childhood.
How did you meet your wife?
We were high school sweethearts in Las Vegas, and we dated in high school and got pretty serious, but when I graduated from high school, I went to Annapolis, and you can't be married. So
Well, that's rude.
I know, so she had to wait 4 years for me to graduate before we got married, and we didn't want to rush into it, so we waited about 22 hours after I graduated before we got married.
And then what did you do?
And then I'd been accepted into the nuclear submarine program. And so I went through a year and a half of school, 6 months in San Francisco at Mare Island, California, in getting effectively a master's degree in nuclear engineering. And then 6 months in Idaho, where the Navy had built a prototype of a nuclear power plant out in the middle of the desert. So if you walked
Arco?
on Arco is where it was, right? We lived in Idaho Falls. But if you walk into the building, you see the rear end of a submarine. And every officer and enlisted has to get qualified on the prototype for the jobs they're going to fill. So that was 6 months. And then I spent 6 months at submarine school in New London, Connecticut. And then went to my first submarine, which was a ballistic missile. We called it a boomer, operating out of Bremerton, Washington. It was actually in the shipyard in overhaul when I reported. So I saw this giant monster with holes and pipes and hoses and thinking, man, I'm going to go 1,000 feet down in that baby. And but it was fun putting it back together. And I was the assistant engineer on that, and then the ops officer and various other jobs, and made a transit through the Panama Canal, and we went over and shot a rocket in the Atlantic in the test range, and then I made 2 Polaris missile patrols on this missile submarine, and then qualified to be engineer, but I was too early to do it, so I requested and got sent back to the Naval Academy on the staff.
So you taught at the Naval Academy?
Yeah, I was really a company officer. I was really there to recruit seniors to be in the nuclear submarine program. But what I really wanted to do was to go back to graduate school. So I got an MBA from George Washington University by going to night school. And then when I finished that tour, I went on a fast attack submarine that didn't carry the missiles as the engineer officer. And we operated out of San Diego and went out and chased Russian submarines during the Cold War.
Did you catch any of them?
We did. We caught several, but we followed the newest Russian submarine for 38 days. And
Did they know you were there?
Well, we don't think so, because our job was to follow him and be there when he launched their newest rocket from a submarine. And I was actually on the scope when that sucker lit off, and it was very exciting. And I don't think they would have done it, you know, had they known we were there. And before a Polaris submarine begins its patrol, I mean, we the Americans do the same thing. You delouse is what it's called, and so you would have a fast attack follow a boomer for some period of time to make sure that nobody was following you. Well, when this Russian sub came out of Petropavlovsk, they actually had 2 Russian submarines, fast attacks, following it. So we anticipated that and got to maneuver around them, and were able to wait for them to leave, and then picked up our trail, and off we went and followed him for 38 days, and it was great fun.
My wife's father was in the Navy. He went to Harvard and got an MBA and then went into the Navy.
Oh, really?
He didn't make it a career, but he was in for
Well, I didn't either. I stayed for 8 years, and I loved it, but it was just too much time away from home. So I actually got out of the Navy after 8 years and worked for Exxon for a couple of years, and then worked for a consulting company, Booz Allen and Hamilton, and then started my own management consulting company serving nuclear plants. And I did consulting for every nuclear plant in the United States, which back then was 103. I think we're down to 100 now, but
Is there a future for nuclear energy?
probably not. You know, not the way we're doing it now. There are 4 nuclear plants being built, 2 in Georgia and 2 in South Carolina right now. And Westinghouse, which is now owned by Toshiba, just declared bankruptcy because the cost of those 4 nuclear plants is $6 billion more than they anticipated. And so they declared bankruptcy, and you know, that rings the death knell of large nuclear plants, in my opinion. But there is on the board SMRs, small modular reactors. And
Can I put one of those in my house?
almost, you know, almost. Probably wouldn't fit in your house because it's about 100 megawatts, but it would fit in a great big hole in the ground, and it's manufactured at a factory and then shipped to the site. In fact, Utah, St. George is invested in the organization that's looking at those. So we'll probably hear more about them. But the first one, you know, with all the hoopla it would take, the first one won't go critical to operate probably till 2023, another 6+ years before it'll be up and running. But you know, they can be mass produced, and hopefully if we can get enough of them built and contracted, then that's a future of nuclear power. But probably big plants, you know, they just cost too much. I mean, you're looking at $8 to $13 billion, and if you have a problem, as has happened with these new plants, you've just lost your company. So I hope so. I mean, I think nuclear power is a wonderful way to generate electricity, but it has to compete with natural gas, which right now is very plentiful and very cheap. So when I finished, at one point in 2001, the LDS Church, Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints,
I've heard of them.
You bet you have, here in St. George. They came to us, my wife and I, and said, hey, we want you to be a mission president, and we'll tell you later where you're going to go. And so I made arrangements to sell my company, and we went to be mission presidents in the Philippines for 3 years. Philippines Naga Mission, the best in all the land is the technical name. Well, when I came back...
The best in all the land?
The best in all the land,
It's
yeah.
offshore.
Yeah, no, the Philippines is...
Oh, the best in the Philippines.
Best in the Philippines, right. So when we came home from that mission, the company I'd sold my company to, Navigant, which is a S&P 500 company, and they came to me and said, hey, we want you to work for us. And I said, well, I'm not sure. So I went and said, let me go do a little research. So I went to some of my old clients and presented a report that Navigant paid for, but I went to the head of nuclear in Entergy, which is down in Mississippi at the time, and I said, is there a future of nuclear power? And he said, as long as the price of natural gas stays above 6.5 cents per million BTU, we can compete with anything. Well, today, the price of natural gas is about 2.5 cents per million BTU, and nuclear power is just struggling to be competitive economically.
Where does natural gas come from?
Comes from the ground, and we found it. We found an abundance of natural gas in the last decade because we've perfected fracking, which is injecting water with chemicals into wells that have, in some cases, been depleted, but in many cases have just been discovered. And by injecting this water with the chemical, it gets into the cracks, that's where the fracking comes from, and releases the natural gas. And we've been able to harvest a lot more natural gas than we ever imagined. And so the price has gone down. And we now in this country have enough natural gas that's the fuel of choice. And we're trying to figure out, okay, how can we liquefy it at a port so that we can then ship it overseas and commercially sell it.
What are you doing now?
Well, I am retired, so that just means nobody's paying me. Now, I am involved with the St. George Interfaith Council. When we finished our mission in the Philippines, a month later, the LDS Church came to us and said, hey, we have another mission for you, and asked us, or sent us to St. George to become the director of the visitor center at the temple, St. George Temple Visitor Center.
How long ago was that?
That was in 2005. So we got here in January of 2005 to run the Temple Visitor Center for 2 years, which was the Temple Visitor Center, the Tabernacle, the Brigham Young Home, and the Jacob Hamlin Home. So I got here in January and I said, hey, for Christmas, it would be great if all of these churches here in St. George, besides the LDS Church, could come and perform in the Tabernacle. And so I went out and invited all the churches to come and sing. And the response from many of the churches were, not only do we not have a choir, we don't have an organist. So I arranged for 3 LDS people to play the organ in some of these other churches, one of which is still being paid today to play at one of the Lutheran churches. But in the course of inviting them and having them come to the Tabernacle, I became friends with the ministers here in St. George. So when we finished our 2-year mission in January of 2007, the church called us to be on the Public Affairs Council with Tom and Patsy Lamb. And so I went to Tom and Patsy and I said, so we're on the Public Affairs, what do we do? And they said, well, we're still kind of working that out. And what came out of that was I said, hey, I have all these relationships with these ministers, and Tom knew some of them. And so I said, let's form St. George Interfaith Council. And that was
that was your idea?
Yeah, so that was like 7.5 years ago. And so my wife and I, we sent letters to, I think, 25 ministers. And I got that list partly from the newspaper, partly from Tom and Patsy Lamb, and partly from Jimmy Keston, Pastor Jimmy, who you've interviewed several times, from Solomon's Porch Foursquare Fellowship. And of those 25 invited, 23 came to the meeting. And I said, holy moly, this is really something. And off we went. And we've been doing that now for, like I said, 7.5 years. And it's just wonderful because we got great friendships, and we now do a lot of things in the community. We conduct the Prayer Over the City, which is on New Year's Day, which was Jimmy's contribution because Pastor Jimmy loves doing that. We hold a National Day of Prayer breakfast on the first Thursday in May, which is co-sponsored by Dixie State. So President Nate Auld and now President Williams have participated in that, along with other dignitaries. And we get the City Council and the Mayor and the Washington County Commissioners and about 26 stake presidents, and then members of the Interfaith Council. And I think we're up to, this year we'll have 16 of those 22 churches will be at the breakfast. And the point, of course, is to let the LDS people know, as well as the people in the Interfaith Council who are not LDS, that there are wonderful people in this town who are not of your faith. And I think it really helps. And this year what I'm doing is I'm actually splitting up some of the stakes and having them sit with churches that are in their stake, because there's been some great relationships. The Good Shepherd Presbyterian is right next to the Pine View Stake Center, and they've done joint service projects. They've had a joint Christmas program, and it's just really works well. The Shepherd of the Hills United Methodist Church he was in the Bloomington stake, and now it's the Rock Canyon stake, I think, and they do things together. Plus, the stake lends tables to the Methodist Church to hold their garage sale every year. So it's a lot of good things. We do the crop walk. We participate in and the crop walk is a national activity that is done all over the country to raise money for.
What is that?
It's communities responding to overcome poverty. And it's really to raise money. It goes to Church World Services, who's a very well-run organization. They spend 8% of their costs on administrative and fundraising. So it passes that test.
That's unheard of.
It's unheard of, yeah. They were at 11% when we first started doing this 8 years ago, and the last report they were down to 8. So, but it encourages people like me to contribute, because that means they are doing it. They're doing it well. So it's a way to raise money, and we just encourage everyone to come. And in some cases, they form teams and raise money. Other times, they just put money in our fishbowl that we have, and we raise actually we've averaged about almost $7,000 a year for the 7 years that we've been doing it. 6 years. This will be the 8th, actually, 8th year this year. And that money goes to help the charities here, help the soup kitchen and the food bank, as well as then provide money to help fight hunger worldwide. So that's a crop walk in November. And then we'll participate in the Family Roots Expo and get some publicity for the Interfaith Council there. We participate in Freshman Friday, and I prepare a big list of all the churches in St. George so that people know the students can come, and you say, what church do you belong to? And if they don't have one, we can say, well, here's your choices. And let the LDS people know there are wonderful churches here in St. George besides the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And then we finish the year by starting over with the prayer over the city. And every 3 years we change officers, and we have a nice dinner. And the last time we had 38 people from 16 different churches gathered at my house for dinner, and including
You must have a big house.
big enough to seat them. It was a little tight, but it's just fun, And what's happened is we've just become great friends, and that is what makes the St. George Interfaith Council work. Is that we're good friends, and so we trust each other. As Pastor Jimmy has said, there's not a single item of doctrine that we all agree on, but we have a great time, and we do good, and we keep a dialogue going, and there have been issues come up in the community that we have helped deal with, and it's really working well.
We're in the Easter time. What's your Easter message?
Well, the Easter message is that Christ lived, and Jesus was the Christ. And for me, that is just amazing. And I think that it's fun to be, the Interfaith Council supports the St. George Catholic Church in the Ecumenical Stations of the Cross, which will be held Friday in 2 days. And this is a 15-station walk down diagonal. And almost all of this year, actually, the Interfaith Council really is arranged for the ministers to be at all of those positions. And it's just a spiritual uplift. It reminds all of us of what Christ went through, and that he was resurrected, and he serves everybody, just like, we're trying to do in the Interfaith Council.
We've got 3 minutes. Tell me about your family.
My wife and I have 6 children, And or as I was telling my son the other day, we have 5 wonderful children, and we have another, and jokingly, and then he said, yes, I know. He said, I tell people that I love one of my parents very much. So, and they are,
Got you on that
and
one.
they are all jokers. And we raised our family in Virginia. So they all went to school at Langley High School, which is within walking distance of the CIA headquarters. And Washington, D.C. was a wonderful place to raise our family. So we have 2 of our children still living there, 1 in Denver, 3 in Salt Lake, and 23 grandchildren and 4 great-grandchildren. And fortunately, we have computers to keep track of the birthdays, or we would be lost, that's for sure. We have a great time.
Well, now, you came here on a mission.
We did.
and decided to stay.
Well, we had bought land 35 years ago in St. George. And actually, the LDS Church knew that we had land here, and that's because we were in the Philippines when Elder Oaks was in the Philippines, and he actually called me less than a month after we got home and said, hey, President, we have another mission for you. But he knew, and I guess told other people, that we had land here, and so we finished our mission and then finished our house and are here forever. Just love it.
His younger brother was my missionary companion.
Merrill. Well, Merrill was the area president of the Philippines when we arrived, which says the Lord has a sense of humor because Elder Oaks replaced Elder Oaks. And it was really
Run
quite
that by
fun.
me again.
Yeah,
the Lord has a
exactly.
sense of humor?
He does.
I'm glad
telling
I
you.
found that
In
out.
fact, one of the areas in my mission was Tobacco. That was the town.
Tobacco?
Tobacco. So I sent Elder Beer and Elder Coffee to Tobacco. Just so I could say that Elder Beer and Elder Coffee served in Tobacco.
Well, I know you've got another appointment you're running to, so we don't want to make you late, but we really appreciate having you
Thank
on.
you. Thanks for doing this.
Well, it's my pleasure. We've been talking with Tim Martin. Did I get that right?
You
I
did.
remembered your name?
You did.
On A Story to Tell from the campus of Dixie State University. Thanks for being with us.